When the lawyer unfolded the will and cleared his throat, I was already nodding, because my mother had promised me that house so many times it felt rude to doubt her. The room smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner, the kind offices use to pretend they are fresh. I remember the ticking clock on the wall, too loud for such a small space, each second landing like a tap on my shoulder. My hands were folded in my lap, fingers laced tight, knuckles pale. I had rehearsed this moment in my head for years, not greed, just certainty, a quiet knowing that some things were settled long before they were written down. I was wrong. The lawyer said my brother's name first and my mind barely registered it. That was normal. He always came first in formal things. Then he said something about equal distribution and my chest tightened. Equal. The word sounded heavy, wrong somehow, like a chair with one leg shorter than the others. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes carried that careful softness professionals use when they know they are about to hurt someone. The house, he said, is to be sold, proceeds divided equally between both children. I waited for the rest of the sentence, the correction, the part where he smiled and said there had been a mistake. None came. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I just stared at the grain of the wooden desk, at a dark scratch shaped like a crooked river, and felt something old and trusted slip out from under me. That house was mine, my mother had said so. She had said it in the kitchen, in the hallway, once even in the hospital when her voice was thin but sure. This house will be yours, she told me, like she was telling me where the sugar was kept or which light switch didn't work. Simple, certain, final. And now, with one page and a signature, it was gone. Before all of this, my life was ordinary in the best way. Quiet mornings, predictable evenings, the kind of days that don't make stories but make a home. I lived in that house with my mother for nearly 15 years. I moved back after my divorce, telling myself it would be temporary, just until I got my feet back under me. But time has a way of settling in, especially when it feels useful. I cooked, I cleaned, I drove her to appointments. I learned the pattern of her breathing at night through the thin walls, how a pause too long meant I should listen closer. The house itself was nothing special to outsiders. A modest 2-story with faded blue siding and a porch that creaked in winter, but it held the shape of our lives. The dent in the hallway wall from when my brother and I wrestled as teenagers, the loose tile in the bathroom we always meant to fix, the apple tree out back that never gave good fruit but bloomed beautifully every spring. My mother liked to sit at the kitchen table in the mornings, hands wrapped around her mug, staring out at that tree. She took her coffee with too much cream. I teased her about it, and she would smile without looking at me. "You'll understand when you're my age," she'd say. "I already understand," I'd reply. "You're wrong." She'd laugh then, a soft sound that ended in a cough she tried to hide. We didn't talk much about the future in those days. There was an unspoken agreement between us. I was there. She was agging. We would take things as they came. When she started forgetting small things, we joked about it. When she forgot bigger things, we stopped joking. My brother Daniel visited on holidays, birthdays if his schedule allowed. He lived 2 hours away with his wife and their grown kids, all busy with lives that didn't have room for agging parents or old houses. He loved our mother, I don't doubt that. But his love came in phone calls and cards, not in pill organizers and late-night worries. Still, she adored him, mothers often do. Whenever he visited, she straightened up in a way she never did for me, put on lipstick, asked me to make his favorite dishes, roast chicken, potatoes with rosemary. She'd sit taller at the table, tell old stories like she was trying to remind him who she had been. One afternoon, years before she died, we were folding laundry together. The radio was playing low, some old song neither of us could name. She held up one of my blouses, frowned at it. "You still wear this?" she asked. "Only when I don't want to impress anyone," I said. She smiled, then grew quiet, folded the blouse carefully, too carefully. "This house," she said suddenly, "it should stay with you." I looked at her surprised. "What do you mean?" "You're the one who's been here," she said. "You've taken care of it, of me." I shrugged, uncomfortable. "That's just how it worked out." She shook her head. "No, it matters." That was the first time she said it outright. Not as a hint, not as a passing comment, as a statement. After that it became something she repeated. When we talked about repairs, when she worried about taxes, when she caught me paying a bill and scolded me for it. "You'll have this house soon enough," she'd say. "Let me worry while I can." I never pushed for paperwork, never asked to see a will. It felt wrong, like counting money before it was earned. She was my mother, not a contract. Looking back now, I see how trust can make you careless. The first real crack appeared the summer before she passed. She had been in and out of the hospital, her strength fading in small, noticeable ways. One evening, while I was making soup, she asked me where Daniel was. At home, I said, probably eating something terrible for dinner. She nodded, then asked again 10 minutes later. That night after she went to bed, I found a folder on the dining room table. Legal papers, neatly stacked. My name wasn't on the top page. I told myself not to snoop. I stood there a long time, the pot of soup cooling on the stove, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, I slid the folder aside without opening it. I didn't want to know anything that would change how I felt about her. The next day, Daniel called. His voice was overly cheerful, stretched thin. "Mom doing okay?" he asked. "She's tired," I said, "Maury confused lately." There was a pause. "Listen," he said, "she mentioned updating some paperwork, just routine stuff." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of paperwork?" "You know, will, power of attorney, that sort of thing." I leaned against the counter, the cool edge pressing into my back. "She told me the house was mine." Another pause, longer this time. "Well," he said carefully, "we'll see what she decides. It's her choice." That was when the unease settled in. Not fear exactly, something quieter, like realizing a door you thought was locked has been left open. But even then I didn't push. I kept caring for her, kept trusting her words over my worries. I believed love would weigh more than documents. When she died that winter, the house felt hollow. Not empty, hollow. Every sound echoed too much. I moved through the rooms like a guest, unsure where to sit, what to touch. And now, sitting in that lawyer's office, hearing that the house was to be sold, I understood how wrong I had been about certainty. The lawyer kept talking, explaining timelines and options, but his words blurred together. All I could hear was my mother's voice, steady and sure, telling me something she hadn't made true. I walked out of that office into the cold afternoon, my breath visible in the air. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, keys in my hand, unsure where to go. The house I had just come from no longer felt like it belonged to me. And for the first time since my divorce, since moving back, since becoming the caretaker instead of the child, I felt unmoored. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that the will was not the betrayal that would hurt the most, that some promises are broken long before they are written down. I drove home slowly, the way you do when you're not ready to arrive anywhere. The streets looked the same, familiar in a way that felt almost cruel. The grocery store on the corner, the church with the chipped steps, life going on without any regard for the fact that something inside me had shifted. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there with the engine running. The house looked smaller than it had that morning. The porch sagged a little more. The paint seemed duller. I wondered if that was how things really were, or if my eyes were already learning to let go. Inside, the air smelled faintly of my mother's lavender cleaner. I hadn't brought myself to change it. I set my keys down in the bowl by the door, the same bowl she used for decades, and stood there listening. No television, no kettle, no cough from the back bedroom. Silence pressed in on me until I had to move just to breathe. I went into the kitchen and made tea out of habit. The kettle whistled too loudly and I jumped. I laughed at myself, a short, sharp sound that didn't feel like laughter at all. When I sat at the table, I found myself staring at her chair. The indentation where she always leaned slightly to the left was still there in the cushion. "She said it was mine," I whispered to no one. The words sounded childish out loud, like I was tattling, like I was trying to convince myself more than anyone else. Daniel called that evening. I let it ring twice before answering. "So," he said, "you met with the lawyer?" "Yes." Another careful pause. "I guess you were surprised." "I was told something different," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He exhaled slowly. "Mom talked about a lot of things near the end. She talked about this for years." "She never told me that." The line crackled slightly. I imagined him in his kitchen, phone tucked between shoulder and ear, already half distracted. "I lived here," I said. "I took care of her." "I know you did," he replied, "and I appreciate it, but the will is the will." That phrase again, heavy, final. "So what happens now?" I asked. "We list the house," he said, "split it down the middle." And where am I supposed to go? There it was, the first time I said it out loud. You'll figure something out, he said, not unkindly but without weight. You always do. After we hung up, I sat at the table until my tea went cold. I tried to tell myself this wasn't personal, that it was just paperwork, but grief has a way of sharpening everything, turning small slights into deep cuts, turning silence into accusation. The next few days passed in a blur of small tasks: death certificates, phone calls, thank you notes, people telling me how lucky I was to have had such a good mother. I nodded and smiled and swallowed my questions. One afternoon, while sorting through a drawer in the living room, I found a small envelope tucked behind old manuals and receipts. My name was written on it in my mother's careful hand. My heart thudded. This was it, I thought, the explanation, the correction. Inside was a note, just a single page. Sweetheart asterisk. If you're reading this, it means I didn't say everything I should have. I hope you know how much you mean to me. You've always been my steady one, my helper. I trust you to do what's right. That was all. No mention of the house, no apology, no clarification, just trust, as if trust could replace security. I folded the note and put it back in the envelope, my hands trembling. For the first time since her death, anger flickered through my grief, not loud, not explosive, just a low burn. Why would she promise me something she didn't intend to give? Or worse, something she gave away quietly while looking me in the eye. I tried to push the thought away. She was old, she was tired. Maybe she believed what she said at the time. But the folder on the table that night came back to me, the phone call from Daniel, the careful way everyone spoke now. Something didn't sit right. The first realtor came the following week, a young woman with a bright smile and a clipboard, walking through the house like she was already imagining someone else's furniture in it. I followed her from room to room, answering questions, nodding politely. Great bones, she said, tapping a wall. Bit dated, but that's fixable. It's fine the way it is, I said before I could stop myself. She smiled, the kind people use when they don't want to argue. Buyers like fresh. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Every creak sounded like a goodbye. Around 2 a.m, I got up and went to the study. The desk lamp cast a small circle of light, making the rest of the room feel distant. I pulled the legal folder from the drawer where I'd put it after the meeting with the lawyer. This time I opened it. The will was straightforward, no tricks, no hidden clauses, everything split evenly. But there was an addendum dated just 6 months before my mother died. That was new. My name appeared there, but not how I expected. I was listed as executor. The room felt suddenly too warm. Executor, the one responsible for carrying out her wishes, for selling the house, for dividing the money. I read it twice, then a third time. My heart beat faster with each pass. Why would she make me executor if she knew this would hurt me? Why put that burden on me? Unless she thought it wouldn't. Unless something had changed. I thought back to that summer, the folder, the call, Daniel's careful tone. A possibility began to form, one I didn't want to entertain. What if the will she promised me wasn't the one she signed last? The next morning I called the lawyer's office and asked a simple question: were there any previous wills? There was a pause, papers rustling. Yes, he said, there was one from several years earlier. And what did it say about the house? Another pause, longer. In that version, he said carefully, the house was left to you. I closed my eyes. So why was it changed? I can't speak to intent, he replied, only to what was executed. Who requested the change? Silence. Your mother came in with your brother, he said finally. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. Did she seem clear? I asked. Yes, he said, she understood what she was signing. After I hung up, I sat very still. The pieces were there now, fitting together in a way that made my chest ache. Daniel had known. He had known all along. And my mother had changed her mind or been persuaded to, and then continued to promise me something she had already given away. The betrayal wasn't just in the will, it was in the years of reassurance, in every time she told me not to worry. I called Daniel again. This time I didn't soften my voice. You went with her to change the will, I said. Yes, he answered, no hesitation now. And you didn't think to tell me. It wasn't your business. It was my home. It was her asset. There it was, the line drawn, clean, legal, cold. I trusted you, I said quietly. I didn't do anything wrong, he replied. Mom wanted it fair. Fair, the word tasted bitter. After we hung up, I walked through the house, touching the walls, the banister, the worn spot on the carpet where she always paused to catch her breath. I realized then that this wasn't just about property. It was about being invisible, about being the one who gives until there's nothing left and then is told that was simply expected. I stood in the living room as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, dust motes floating like tiny stars. Something settled in me then, not peace, not yet, but resolve. If the house was going to be sold, it would be done on my terms, and if the truth was going to hurt, it would at least be known. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. It changes the way every memory sits in your body. Conversations replay themselves with new emphasis. Silences grow teeth. I started noticing things I had ignored for years. The way Daniel always asked about the house's value when he visited. The way my mother's tone shifted whenever money came up. The small, careful way she avoided my eyes near the end when she spoke about the future. None of it proved anything on its own, but together it formed a picture that made my chest ache. I did confront Daniel again right away. I needed time, not to calm down but to think clearly. Anger can make you reckless, grief can make you desperate. I had to be neither. As executor, I had responsibilities, timelines, paperwork. I learned the language of estate management quickly, appraisals, liens, closing costs. Every word felt like a small erasure of my life in that house, but I kept going. The second realtor came with Daniel on speakerphone. He wanted to be involved now. I stood in the kitchen while the realtor talked about staging and minor renovations, Daniel's voice floating in from the phone, confident and detached. We should paint, he said. Neutral colors sell better. That paint was chosen by Mom, I said. And now it's a product, he replied. Let be practical. The realtor glanced at me, sensing tension. We can discuss options, she said gently. After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the walls. I remembered my mother picking that color. How she held up swatches, squinting, asking my opinion, and then choosing what she liked anyway. I decided then that I would not erase her, not completely. I agreed to list the house, but I refused to rush. I chose the realtor. I set the schedule. Every decision was mine as executor, and Daniel knew it. He didn't like it, but the paperwork was clear. You're dragging this out, he said on one call. I'm doing my job, I replied. You're being emotional. I'm being thorough. There's a difference, and people who benefit from speed rarely appreciate it. As weeks passed, the house began to attract attention. Showings, open houses, strangers walking through, commenting on space and light, unaware they were stepping through my history. I stayed during the showings, sitting quietly in the study, listening to their voices drift through the halls. One afternoon, a woman paused at the doorway and said, "It feels loved." I almost thanked her. Daniel visited in person for the first time since the funeral on a rainy Saturday. He stood in the doorway like a guest, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the room. "Looks smaller," he said. "Everything does when you don't live in it," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where our mother used to drink her coffee. I poured us both tea. He didn't comment on the cups, they were hers. "I don't want this to get ugly," he said. "Neither do I." "Then let's just get it done." I looked at him across the table. The lines in his face were deeper than I remembered. He looked tired, not guilty, just tired. "Did you know she was still telling me the house was mine?" I asked. He hesitated. "She said things. She said it clearly. She didn't like conflict," he said. "She didn't want to upset you. So she lied." He flinched at the word. "She chose peace. At my expense." He looked away then, out the window at the rain. For a moment I saw my brother again, the boy who used to follow me around the yard, who cried when our father left, who once promised he'd always look out for me. "I needed the money," he said quietly. There it was, not an excuse, an explanation. My business was struggling, The kids' tuition, we talked about it, she wanted to help. And I didn't factor into that. You were already here, he said. You had a roof. I felt something harden in me then, not hatred, clarity. So you took it, I said, and you let her keep telling me otherwise. He didn't answer. That night after he left, I went through her things more carefully than I had before, not out of sentiment but out of need. I needed to understand her mind near the end. In the back of her closet behind old coats I found a box. Inside were letters, some from Daniel, some from friends, and one from her addressed to Daniel never sent. The paper was creased, like it had been read many times. I know you're worried about money, asterisk she wrote, I want to help you, but I worry about your sister. This house is her home, I don't know how to choose without hurting someone. My throat tightened. You say she'll manage, you say she's strong, I hope you're right. That was it, no resolution, just hope. I sat on the bed and cried then, not loud, not dramatic, just tears slipping down one after another, soaking into fabric that smelled faintly of her perfume. She hadn't lied out of malice, she had lied out of fear, fear of being the bad one, fear of choosing. And in not choosing, she had chosen anyway. The house sold faster than I expected, a young couple with a baby on the way. They walked through holding hands, whispering plans. I watched them from the stairs unseen and felt a strange mix of grief and relief. On the day we signed the final papers, Daniel and I sat side by side in silence. The amount was more than I had ever seen in my account at one time, less than the house was worth to me. When the check was cut, I slid mine into my bag without looking at it. Daniel folded his carefully, like it was something fragile. Outside the sun was bright, too bright for the heaviness I carried. So, he said, I guess this is it. For the house, I replied. He nodded, I'm sorry. I believed him, it didn't change anything. In the weeks that followed, I packed my things. Each box felt like a small goodbye. I moved into a small apartment across town. It was clean, quiet, mine in a way the house never quite was. The first night there, I lay on the bed listening to unfamiliar sounds. Traffic, neighbors, a life that didn't include anyone else's expectations. I thought about calling Daniel, about forgiving him fully, about asking for something back that could never be returned. Instead, I turned off the light and let myself rest. Some losses don't ask for revenge, they ask for honesty. Grief doesn't end when the boxes are unpacked, it just changes rooms with you. In the apartment, everything echoed. The walls were too white, the windows too clean. I could hear my own breathing at night, the soft rise and fall of a life no longer anchored to anyone else's routine. I told myself this was freedom. Some days I even believed it. I started a new rhythm, morning walks before work, simple dinners. I stopped cooking for an army and learned how to season food for one. At first I made too much and ate leftovers out of obligation. Eventually I learned how to stop before that familiar ache of overgiving set in. Daniel sent a text a week after the sale. Hope you're settling in. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I am. It was true enough. The money sat in my account like something borrowed. I didn't touch it right away. I needed to know who I was without the house before I decided what to do with the part of it I carried in numbers. One evening I visited the old neighborhood. I parked across the street and watched lights flick on inside the house. The new owners had painted the porch a soft grey. The apple tree was still there, though. I smiled at that. A woman stepped out onto the porch, phone to her ear, one hand resting on her stomach. She laughed, and for a moment the sound overlapped with my mother's laughter in my memory. It didn't hurt the way I expected. It felt like a passing of breath. I drove away without going inside. Not long after, I received a letter from Daniel. An actual letter, not a text. His handwriting was uneven, like he wasn't used to writing by hand anymore. He wrote about guilt, about pressure, about how easy it had been to justify things when money was tight and time felt short. He didn't ask for forgiveness outright. He didn't deserve it that easily. But he didn't defend himself either. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Some conversations don't need an answer right away. What surprised me most in those months was the quiet support that came from unexpected places. Neighbors from the old street who reached out. A coworker who listened without trying to fix anything. Even the lawyer who called to check in, his voice less professional, more human. "You did everything right," he said once. I thought about that, about how right had still left me homeless in a way. I thanked him anyway. The truth is, I had choices now. I could stay angry. I could let this fracture define my relationship with my brother, or I could decide that love, once damaged, didn't have to be destroyed. I met Daniel for coffee 3 months later. Neutral ground, a small place near the train station. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. We talked about ordinary things at first. Whether work, his kids, mine never came up, there were none. That too had always been assumed I would manage. "I think Mom thought you were stronger than you needed to be," he said quietly, stirring his coffee. "I think she was afraid of disappointing anyone," I replied. We sat with that for a while. "I can't give you the house back," he said. "I don't want it back," I answered, surprised by how true that felt. What I wanted was acknowledgement, and in that moment I had it. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "I hope someday you'll trust me again." "I hope someday you'll be worthy of it," I said, not unkindly, just honestly. He nodded. In the months that followed, I used some of the money to do something my mother had always talked about but never did. I took a long trip, nothing glamorous, just time away. I walked through unfamiliar streets, sat in cafes alone, listened to my own thoughts without interruption. I learned that I liked my own company, that my worth wasn't tied to being needed, that caretaking, when it becomes identity, can erase you. I kept one thing from the house, the kitchen table. It barely fit in the apartment, but I made it work. I ate at it every night. It grounded me, reminded me where I came from without trapping me there. Sometimes I still hear my mother's voice, not accusing, not apologetic, just present. I choose to remember her that way. I don't tell this story to paint myself as a victim. I tell it because so many of us are promised things we never receive, not because of cruelty, but because of fear and silence. If I've learned anything, it's this: love that is brave can still wound deeply, and strength, when assumed instead of honored, becomes a burden. I'm lighter now, not because I lost less, but because I stopped carrying what was never meant to be mine alone. I've replayed this story in my mind more times than I can count, not because I want to relive the pain, but because I keep asking myself what I would do differently if I had the chance. Would I have pushed harder, asked for proof, forced conversations no one wanted to have, or would that have changed nothing at all? What I know now is this: promises spoken in love can still be broken in fear, and sometimes the people who hurt us most are not cruel, they are simply unwilling to sit with discomfort, so they choose the path that feels easiest in the moment, even if it costs someone else everything. For a long time I blamed myself for trusting words instead of paperwork, for believing that years of care would naturally be honored, but trust is not foolish, it is human, and I refused to be ashamed of loving honestly, even when it wasn't returned in the same way. Losing that house taught me something I didn't expect. Home is not just walls and memories, it's the place where you are not required to earn your worth. When that lesson finally settled in me, I stopped feeling displaced. I started feeling free. My relationship with my brother is quieter now, more careful, maybe it always will be, but it's honest, and that too has value. If you're listening to this and carrying a similar hurt, I hope you hear this part clearly. You are not weak for believing people you love. You are not foolish for giving more than you received, and it is never too late to choose yourself without becoming bitter. So let me ask you something, honestly. If you were promised something your whole life, and the truth took it away in one moment, would you fight for what was said? Or would you walk away and build something new? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments, and if stories like this help you feel less alone, consider subscribing and supporting the channel. You never know whose story might sound a little too familiar next time.